So 3-month update, MIA update, a little bit about who I am. I'm 36. I have 5 kids. I'm a foster parent. I'm half Japanese. I wasn't raised speaking Japanese for various reasons. And I've been, like a lot of people, dabbling and learning Japanese for a long time. And we'll talk about that. I also want to talk about just my long-term goals. I know everyone is kind of a little bit different in the community. And so that'll explain kind of what I'm doing and why if we look at the goals. So generally, my long-term goals, so what I would consider long-term success would be 95% accuracy in just everyday conversation, being able to understand that readily. Same with reading, being able to read. I like to read Wikipedia articles. So for me, I would consider that, if I could read 95% of that, I'd consider that a long-term success. Harry Potter, I think a lot of people use too as a standard, and I think that would be a good one. 95% of the media that I watch, we have that Netflix frequency list that was put out, and I'll try to link to in the video. But I'm not necessarily looking at watching everything, so I don't necessarily care. It's just what I'm interested in, that I'd like to have a high degree of fluency. And then texting conversations, I don't really need to be writing reports or things like that. So that's kind of what I'm looking at. We have, whenever people do these updates, we pick a month, even though we've a lot of times been doing it longer. So I've actually, I would say, shoved 4.5 months of learning into 5 years. Before this, I actually started like 5 years ago, just thinking maybe if I did a little a day, 5 minutes a day, just for fun, not really for any particular reason. I had a terrible kanji app. It had nothing in it. It just was the kanji in the meaning, no stroke order, no order to how you learned it. And I did that for actually a year, just for no good reason. And, I don't know, after a year, I looked up one day and I found a separate function in this terrible app, and I could count how many kanji I knew, and it was in the hundreds. And I thought, well, that's kind of more than I expected. So I thought, well, maybe I'll try something seriously, but this is now still 4 years ago. So I said, okay, well, I'll try Pimsleur. So I bought the Pimsleur CDs, and they were all right. I listened to them in my commute. I guess they're fine for what they're worth. I wouldn't say I necessarily learned a lot, but you get used to maybe some of the sounds and some basic words and structures and grammar, and I suppose that's okay. I did that for a while. I've also tried Glossica, which I also think I think it's better than Pimsleur, personally. I think it works best if you're looking at your computer screen, reading the text, if you've already gone through your kanji. I think that's really useful. But for me, that was just not realistic to be sitting at a computer for 30 minutes straight or an hour. I do all my Anki reps on my phone. So I think Glossica's okay. I do like the downloadable function. You can download a lesson in English and Japanese, and I think that's better than sitting at the desktop. But even then, if they had some way of bringing the actual desktop experience to a phone, I think that would probably be beneficial. But as it is, I don't really use that. A couple other mistakes I made in that, in the time leading up to recently, when I started kind of a more structured learning, I thought, well, in that same logic of learning a kanji a day kind of thing, what if I was interested in some other languages at the time, and that's kind of, I kind of came to the conclusion that was maybe misguided effort, because if I get to where I want with Japanese, I can always revisit those. So that was maybe, we'll call that a mistake. Like a lot of people, especially years ago, I did Heisig, just the traditional method, not lazy kanji or anything like that. I didn't hate it, but partially because I was still taking it very, very slowly by comparison. So I didn't have this kind of really terrible experience. But at the same time, I didn't have this dramatic learning curve either. So, take that for what it's worth. I was still taking Anki pretty slowly. I don't think there was many resources out there back then. So I was going through the core deck, but not like NukeMarine's more organized core deck. And so instead of being I+1 sentences, these would often be like I+5, I+6, maybe I plus, like if it's a long sentence, like I+8, because you're literally entering with no knowledge at all, and then you just have this full-on sentence, and you may not know a single word. That wasn't actually awful either, because um, it was really good ear training, I think, listening to it. So kind of receptively looking for just the one word that you were trying to identify in the sentence. And then, like if it were like kokusai kaigi or something, and maybe you're looking for kaigi, then but because it's modifying kokusai kaigi, then you are learning incidentally other words. Um, it's definitely much harder than an I+1 format, but I think the outcome is generally the same. But I was still just taking it really slowly. I've done a number of decks, and some of them I think were good. Some of them, take them or leave them. I've had a counters deck for just counters. I had a kana deck, which actually I think for me was probably beneficial. A Taikim vocab and grammar deck, which I don't know that I've used in an effective way, and a deck of just maybe like 60 body parts, and I actually thought that was probably a fairly useful deck. So some of them were better than others. But I'm calling this my 3-month update, one, because I'm much more consistently going through my Anki, trying to use that consistently. Also, I switched over to using the Tango, which a lot of people are using right now. And that's been good because it's filling in a lot of gaps, because it's more consistent, especially since I wasn't using the core decks that were organized. I was just using this jumble. So maybe I might know a lot of the words, or be able to read them because the readings are similar to words that I know, but it's filling in a lot of holes. So that's been good. So I've been taking my time to go through that. So I'm about to finish the N4 and then start the N3. I had to decide. For me, I'm very busy. Ohtalkwho talks about that. And so although I am trying to transition into monolingual right now, would be a hard transition for me. I've also used the MIA's, Matt and Yoga's deck, the Shinmeikai deck, and that is good, but it also helps me realize I'm not anywhere near the monolingual transition using the Shinmeikai dictionary. So, yeah, I guess in terms of catching up, so I was looking through my Anki hours, and there's a lot of information there, and I would say, yeah, I probably put in about 4.5 months of actual work before I started the Tango series, but that was spread over such a long period that you're doing reps just to remember those, you're doing your reviews. And so it's kind of like a mortgage, where you look at your mortgage statement and so much of it's interest, right? And so when you're spreading them out over a long period of time, you end up doing lots and lots of hours, but you're not learning new words. So you're not making progress like you need to. But the flip side of that is that I'm very comfortable with not only those words, but a lot of those kanji characters, so that I'm not going through stories or things like that. I'm just, I don't know, hundreds and hundreds of kanji where I just kind of have a feeling, I guess I'd say, about it. And that's been helpful when I'm learning it. It also hasn't been unpleasant. So if you're trying to learn it quickly, I wouldn't recommend doing it that way. But if that's all the energy you have to invest or time, then it's also not terrible, because something's better than nothing. Yeah. So what I'm not doing passive learning. I'm a speech therapist, and so maybe that guides some of my views on language learning. I don't put a huge weight to passive learning. I think there are a lot of, I could give you maybe, we'll say, scientific reasons why I don't believe in that. But I would put it something like this. Imagine you're traveling down a 4-lane highway, and somebody says to you, count all of the white cars passing you. If you're driving, you'd probably find that a fairly difficult task. You could do it, but maybe not safely. And then somebody said, well, don't worry about counting them. If you just ignore them, but think about them, be aware of it, then in time, you'll have a better awareness of how many white cars are passing. The reality is you really wouldn't. you would always have to exert some active level of attention. Otherwise, your brain would just kind of realize that's unimportant information and block that out. And so for me, that's kind of how it is. And so when I was using passive learning, I found it was just a distraction. So if I'm trying to do something else, whether write a report or something like that, it's just too distracting, because if I do try to pay attention to whatever it is I'm listening to, then I'm not writing effectively, efficiently. And if I'm very invested in what I'm typing or something, then I can't. It's just distracting and stressful. So if it works for somebody else, that's great. For me, I found it was just not worth the extra energy. The other thing that I mentioned earlier was writing. I don't have a need for that, so I'm not practicing that. As far as progress, my morphs right now are 2710. I just kind of refreshed them, recalculated them. Definitely, I know more than that in terms of, like, I was looking through that Excel spreadsheet that I don't know if I can link to, but I'll see if I can find that. Ohtalkwho also talks about that. The Japanese, like, analyzer, whatever. And I look through those and I'm like, there are tons on here that on my priority list that I know. But 2710. Right now, I'm about 3 months into my tango. So again, that's why I picked that number, even though, I'd say I'm further on the whole, but I'm able to guess a lot of words in media, which is really nice, because that's kind of more natural learning. Because if you know so little words, you can't even begin to guess which word means what, because you don't recognize a single word. But if you know a certain percentage and there's one or two words you're missing, then you start to be able to fill that in. Same goes with reading. If you're in Japan and you see like a series of kanji on let's say a delivery truck, well, which word is like the name of the company and which word is the truck or delivery or something? I mean, you don't know, because you don't know any of them. Whereas if you know whatever it is, like takuhaibin or whatever, then maybe you recognize, this other character I don't know is a proper noun describing the company. It's that same kind of concept where, so in context, I'm able to pick up a lot more of it, and that's been encouraging. Hearing loan words is really improved. At that, when you begin, it's funny to watch old series again, because I won't have caught that they're using a loan word, an English word, whereas now I catch loan words very, very readily. And so that also, loan words for me, I find are very easy to then learn the meaning. So that's another way where you're kind of learning these things incidentally through your, watching your whatever media you're watching or listening to. I haven't attempted really much reading, just because it's too frustrating and too time consuming for me right now. I'm not ready to put that kind of time into it. So I'm sure that will slow my progress as far as that goes, but that's what I'm willing to put into it. I'm a busy adult, like a lot of them say. Otaku's fond of saying. When I do read, I tend to read ahead on the Tango series on my Kindle, which is great. I would definitely back what everyone else says and just get a Kindle dedicated to whatever reading you're going to do and go with that. I think that's a really solid recommendation. My grandparents are Japanese. A couple summers ago, I had my father do kind of an interview with my grandmother, and I was rewatching that actually this week, and I was able to catch a lot more of that. Not necessarily all of it, but dramatically more. And there are definitely parts where you could hear them conversing, and it was, for me, really encouraging to be able to hear them in their own voice, to hear them in their own words, in their own voice, not through translation, not through. And so for me, that was really, I don't know. I mean, in one sense, it's not a big benchmark, because it's not like I could understand the whole thing. But in another sense, it really was a meaningful benchmark for me. So I appreciated that. Another deck that I've used, and I'll come to some kind of resources at the end that I appreciate, want to shout out to a couple of people. So Dogen has his whole series everyone's aware of, but if you're a patron, one of his patrons had made a deck for, just a bunch of him speaking set word with the patterns identified, and I suspended everything that wasn't. So if it just had the text, I just suspended that. But then that way I'm listening. What I use that deck for is just listening. What pitch pattern am I trying to identify? And that's gotten a lot better just through a couple minutes a day there. So that's been another thing. As far as plans, I'm really going to ease in slowly to the monolingual transition. It's just, I can easily do 40 new cards, 50, 60 new cards in the Tango series. And it's kind of, it's not even that it takes so much time to make these decks. There's a certain, like, I guess, emotional barrier to doing something new. And so I'm kind of tinkering with some of these, with the subs to SRS decks and things like that. But I'm definitely going to take that slowly, and probably in another 3 months, I anticipate I'll probably be close to finishing N3 book and hopefully closer to monolingual transition, but I don't imagine that I'll even attempt it then. I may go ahead and finish the core decks. I haven't decided. I do like them a lot, so maybe that's just my bias. Maybe they're not even good, but I just enjoy them. And then I think the subs to SRS priority lists are really key. So once I finish N3, I think what I'll do is, and we'll revisit it, but I think what I'll do is I'll take my priority list for a couple of shows I like and work through maybe the top 500 and see where we are on that. So a couple of, I wanted to keep the video just really short, partially because I have no intention of editing this or spending any more time on it. But I hope it could be encouragement, because there are a lot of people who are doing a really great job with their language learning, and then there are people like me who haven't maybe made it a priority. But I want them to know that they can see progress too. So just, yeah, hopefully it's encouraging to people like that. So my father's Japanese. He was raised, educated in every way. He's Japanese, in Tokyo. And he's fluent in English. By any standard, he's successful. He's fluent in English. He's a high performer in his field. And he gave me a couple pieces of advice, not knowing anything what I was doing with MIA or any other language learning. And so I just thought I'd share that because I thought it was interesting and I just thought it was relevant. So my dad's advice was, he gave a couple pieces of advice. One, he said, imagine you're an alien and you show up on an alien world and you already know that language. And he said that's kind of how you have to view it. You have to almost take on a separate persona who already knows the language. And I think that's helped me with things like, especially with loan words, like erebeta or something like that, where it's very unnatural for me to say it that way when I know that the target sound is elevator. So, but then you think, okay, that's not who I am. I'm not this English speaking person. I'm going to say it that way. Another piece of advice he gave was, he said, you have to use the dictionary in that language. So he said for him, back in the late 70s, early 80s, he just got a big old college dictionary and that was it. Now you have to be at a certain level to use that, but he said that was his biggest thing. He's like, you really have to get into that language's dictionary. And so I thought that was an interesting comment given how much people stress the monolingual transition. He also stressed it's, a lot of people are moving towards lazy kanji. And yeah, I guess I would say that, I still keep up my reps for all my kanji, and I still add one a day. So, eventually I'll know, I don't know, 3,000 are in my deck or something. But I've stopped using stories for one, and I've stopped writing them because he said, he's just like, there's no point, so there's no reason. And so for now I'm going to go with that. He just recommends if you can read it, then you're good. The other thing that the last point he kind of makes is, when you have a certain degree of language learning, a lot of that will fall in place, living there or moving there, this kind of thing. And I think that's another thing that, people talk about, just immersion. But I think that what I would amend slightly there is you have to know something. You really have to have a good foundation, because if you just start with immersion, you're not going to learn anything. Like I say, you're going to go and you're going to see a truck and you're going to see characters on it, and you're not going to have any idea what it's describing. Is it the brand? Is it the product? You'll have no idea. Some other kind of points so that was him. For me, when you're in, so that, yeah, we talked about the proper names on the truck. The other one is, like, there's just tons of katakana in Japan. And so, like, if you were going to try to pick the lowest hanging fruit, I would say if you were to get your katakana down, then you would immediately be able to read a huge number of products like in a store, or a bathroom or something like this, or a remote control on an air conditioning unit or something. So if you're going to do one thing to quickly improve your ability to function, I would say practice katakana. Some other personal kind of comments. There's a lot of people talk about meditation, and I can definitely understand where that comes from, because if you're going to like sit down and try to focus for 20 straight minutes on Anki reps or whatever challenging thing it is that you're doing in language learning, you really need to have your head clear from excess noise, we'll say. For me, I'm not into Eastern meditation. And so I'm just, if that's not for you, I'd say that's okay. If you want to read your Bible or pray or read another holy book, I'd say probably that's worth doing. But yeah, you do want to kind of have your head not occupied with other background noise, just because it's going to severely derail you from efficiently moving through any kind of text, whether it's reading or Anki or even just listening for whatever it is you're listening for. Another thing is I don't suspend things. That's a personal preference. Like in the Tango books, there's like the prefectures, and a lot of people will suspend the prefectures, and that's fine. I mean, I can understand why they do that. I personally don't. One, because I think it's important to know the readings, because they're very, very common readings and they help you in other words. The other reason is I think that it builds up a certain common body of knowledge. So even though people aren't going to necessarily, go around talking about Hyogogen or whatever, and that's not a high frequency word, at the same time, like imagine, in American education or wherever you're from, I imagine that your country's geography is really important and something that's a piece of shared knowledge or information. And so it carries a lot of weight to it, and it's definitely a common piece of information, common knowledge. And so I don't suspend those kinds of things, even if maybe they're low frequency. What I do is I've changed my Anki, the way the reps work, the reviews work, and how far they're pushed out. And I'll try to link to that, even though I'm really super not techie, but I'll try. And so with the new Anki setup, if I see it once, I can immediately push it out 2 months, from the first time I see it. Or if I want to see it like 1 day, 6 days, 15 days, and then like it just goes up from there. So you're rarely seeing these words. So I mean, like you might see this word a couple times, and then it's like pushed out to like 3 years. So I still leave it there. And then it also doesn't mess with the function of Morphman either, because I haven't suspended it. It's still in the deck as a known thing. I changed how I changed how I review my cards. When I was first learning even one word was so challenging, where I would have phonetic like triggers. So just like how people have stories for their kanji, I would have stories for a single word. And so I would attach a character or something very visual like that to a certain kana. And so then a verb might have 3 kana, and I would create a story. That's how labor intensive it was to remember one word. But now that I have a few thousand, I find it's not nearly so challenging. Plus, a lot of times it's building on other vocabulary, and so it kind of just makes sense a lot of times. Sometimes it doesn't. And so what I do, though, is I basically just, first time I see it, I'll put it at 1 day, and so then I'll see it again tomorrow. So I won't even see it again today. And then a lot of times I'd say, then I'm ready to push it out to 6 days the next day. If I'm not, then I just see it again for a day. And I find that even if I'm dealing with a few dozen words or more, if I see it once a day, every day for a week, I tend to find that that's really all I need. And I don't really need to put any special effort into it. And so I'm able to move through a lot of cards at a time like that. But that definitely is, like, for me, been a changing, developing kind of process. And so whatever works for you, I would just really emphasize, do the thing that works for you. A couple of shout outs and things that I'll just put in the link below if I can figure it out is, if you're busy like me, you can make it work. For me, I found it's more about having like the emotional bandwidth to do extra, not so much the time. And I'll link, I call him the busy ninja. when I talk about him. So I'll link to his video. I think he has the best video on that. Ohtalkwho, just a big shout out. Netflix frequency list, and that came from, I think it was originally Yoga who had like pulled all those, but then it's been since used to, put in spreadsheets and do other cool things. Matt and Yoga, Shinmeikai, and all the other stuff they've done. I mean, they've done a ton. So I'm going to link to their Patreon because I really think that's worthwhile. NukeMarine, his decks are way better than like the random ones I pulled off Anki and struggled through, and I've appreciated that. Dogen. One thing about Dogen, big shout out, obviously, for people known for the phonetics, but going through the videos and being a speech, maybe that's because I'm a speech pathologist, but I really appreciated his articulation videos. In fact, maybe even more, because those are ways I think you can make a very, very, like not instant, but a really big change in a really short period of time. If you're just producing the sound differently, meaning the particular morpheme or then, or phoneme, and not phoneme, but morpheme, then just ignoring pitch being difficult, but you can make these other changes really readily. So I'd highly recommend that. He doesn't really advertise that, but I think that's really cool. And then that Anki video to switch up how your reps are kind of brought to you. So I kind of went through it really quickly because I just wanted the video to be short, because like everyone else says, I mean, if you're watching this video, that's great. I hope you're encouraged that even someone like me who's kind of not really been putting a lot of effort into it can have some small, success. I hope you're encouraged. But at the same time, like, you could be doing your reps, you could be, I don't know, doing your tango book. So, just go ahead and get at it. And hopefully I'll follow up in 3 more months and see how that goes. Bye.